So, thank you for joining this session about ethics in software. I'm Boris Baldassari. I work for the Eclipse Foundation as an open source consultant. And I'd like to start with by saying that I'm not an ethicist. I do not have a degree in philosophy or whatsoever. I'm just a software practitioner. But then I do believe that I can still talk about ethics, and actually we should all talk about ethics. Why should we talk about ethics? Well, ethics are part of our everyday life. It's not a destination, it's a journey. And it really starts with a discussion. We really need all together to set up the rules and find a common definition and agreement on what ethics mean to us. So that's really an important discussion we need to have. I'd like to state this old story about I think it comes from a Cherokee grandpa teaching life to his grandson. And he says, between each person there is a fight going on with two wolves. One of them is anger and superiority and frustration and ego. And the other one is peace and love and hope and compassion and empathy. And the kid asks, which wolf wins? And the grandpa says, the one you feed. So this talk and the talk we need to have is about feeding the right wolf. Now, a word of warning. I tried really hard not to put my own beliefs in this talk, but that's really hard to do. So please, after this talk, you can take away the references, the train of thoughts, the questions, but certainly not the answers. That said, so a few words about ethics. Ethics, there are many definitions going around. Even if you look at the academic papers and so on, you will find a lot of different definitions. So the common agreement is that ethics is the study of the customs and values of a group. Another definition I like and that I will use during this talk is when we set up a set of rules that will protect us from doing evil and that will force us kind of to do the right thing. There are different ways to look at it. One of them is consequentialism. So we don't really care about the rules, but we look at the consequences of our actions and decide according to that. The other one is the deontology. So in this case, you care about the rules, you define a set of rules, you stick to them, and whatever the consequences, you did what you had to do. So there are different approaches. Another distinction we can make is the difference between ethics and morality. So once again, there are a lot of different definitions. Generally speaking, morality is about the one individual, what they think as being right or wrong, whereas the ethics part is more at the community level. And if we get back to the previous definition, setting up the rules that will make us make the right decisions. It really depends on the context, on the values, on the culture and so on, so we need to have a lot of humility when we talk about ethics, and one of the first things we need to do is to have a common agreement and definition of what ethics are for us as a community. Another really important definition is politics. So politics is the study of the relative distribution of power, authority or privileges in human societies. And we have to recognize that technology has a huge impact on this distribution of power. We are doing software, we are building software, we know software, so technology is not neutral, definitely, and we have a duty. Now, talking about the consequences of ethics in software. A few years ago, we were saying software is eating the world. So now that has happened, and software has eaten the world. It's everywhere. It has a huge impact on individuals, communities, societies, the planet. And most of the people who are impacted by software and technology, they don't know anything about software, and they probably do not have to. And the thing is, we know software. We are building software. We are responsible for the software we produce and how we consume it. And so we have kind of a power through this knowledge and with great power comes great responsibility. So we need to take care of that for all of them. Another point is that software is only a tool, and you cannot control what people will do with this tool. So as an example, a hammer, that's a great tool to build a house. That's also a great tool to kill someone. That works well. And please try to imagine a hammer that can build houses, but that cannot kill people. That's impossible. So it's really a tool, and we can do our best to prevent people to use this tool that we build for evil, but then we do not have control over the usage. How do we apply ethics? First, at the individual level. It starts from there. So we have to decide what is wrong or what is right for us as individuals. Then, as communities, we need to define a set of rules, or what is okay or not okay for us as a community, in the way we behave together, or in the way we do things, and so on. And it's not only about doing the right thing, it's also about doing the smartest thing. Because when people feel safe, and when they know that they can speak freely, and they feel love and comprehension and empathy, then we tend to better collaborate, we are more creative, we are more efficient. So caring about ethics is not about doing the right thing, it's also about doing the smartest and the most efficient thing. Let's have a quick look at the landscape of ethics today and from the beginning. Of course, it's a huge domain, especially today, so we'll have only a few glimpses on what happens. From the roots, so starting from the very beginning, the first communities, hackers communities, had a code of conduct. It was not written, but everybody knew it and abided to it. So it started with Levi, Hamnem, and Eric Raymond. Then there were the 4 essential freedoms, which are still nowadays the basis of most open source software and what we do as an open source community. We can talk also about software quality attributes. So if you're working on a medical device, you probably want to take a great care of safety or security. When we build a system that with personal information in there, we want to include security in that. So the software quality attributes that we usually use also reflects what we call ethics to some extent. And I have to mention, so as a part of this huge community that was there from the beginning, they're still there. The communities have grown. There are fab labs, there are conferences, there are workshops on ethical hacking, and there are all these communities about techno-shamanism and techno-utopians and so on. So maybe techno-shamanism is not your thing, but these guys have been thinking and discussing about our relationship with the nature, with the environment, with the communities, and the link between humans and the technology for years. The industry has not done that, and these people have a lot of interesting ideas about this thing. So it's quite interesting to have a look, even if it's not our thing especially. Of course, there are a code of conduct, a code of ethics. These are quite widespread right now, nowadays. Code of conduct is rather about the way we behave together, how we should act, what we should say, and what we should not say. Code of ethics is rather for the business and decision making. So as a company, we say that we target that and we don't want to do that. We want to do good and not evil. Most companies have a code of ethics. We can see that it's not enough, but it's a really good start for many reasons. One of them is that it starts the conversation in the company. So we have a code of ethics, so we are allowed to talk about it. And it also gives a reference to people. So let's say that a company has a code of ethics and the manager at some point wants to do something that is a bit borderline. Then the workers, the people can come and say, well, look, we have a code of ethics, and what you're asking us right now is not exactly aligned with that. So it gives a reference to argue and to discuss and to probably not do the wrong thing. There is also this thing about ethical source, which is a new trend since a couple of years. And they are trying to solve misuses of open source software. So when we build open source software, usually what we want is to work for the greater good, and people build tools that kill people and so on with that. So maybe we want to prevent that. Usually the ethical source paradigm tend to empower developers or to put do things about union labors and taking care of people, of community or whatsoever. They come with a few ethical licenses, so that make sure that if you use this software, you respect the rights of your workers or the communities and so on. So it's great. We understand that it's a good thing they're thinking of, but it's not open source because there is a restriction on the usage, and if you restrict the usage, that's not open source. And also, we are not sure it works. It was never brought to court, and so we're just not sure it works. Another problem is it hits the morality dilemma. So as an example, the JSON license, which is quite well known, they say, so we are not liable for what happens with the software and so on. You can use it for whatever, except that you have to do good with that, and you should not do evil. So in most cases, or in some cases, we all agree on the fact that killing someone, that's wrong. Okay, so this one is easy. Then think about, I want to use your piece of software for a toolchain for an abortion process. Oh, that gets tricky. Some people would say it's good, some would say it's pure evil. So the morality wall and dilemma here makes it not work. So the intent is good, but for now we are not ready yet, and according to these people, it's maturing, and so it probably needs some more years to think about it and see how it works in the court and so on. But the intent is good, really. One good news about ethics nowadays is that it's a growing trend. Now you look on the internet, you have more and more resources, articles, you even have conferences about human rights and about the technology, how technology can be used for the greater good, and about privacy, things like that. So you have a lot of material that makes a big difference compared to 10 years ago. And another thing is that we can discuss it nowadays. So 10 years ago, when you would have this discussion with your boss, with your colleagues, they would look at you and say, oh, you're a dreamer, that's beautiful. Now they tend to take that seriously. We know that it can have huge consequences. We have seen some of them the last years with fake news and things like that. So now we can and we should discuss it. And that makes a big difference once again. Another thing that evolved is the software quality attributes that we use. A couple of years ago, we would talk about readability, maintainability, safety, security. Now we tend to include things like sustainability, the community, frugality, to not consume what we don't absolutely need, and that's also a really good sign. And we still have these communities around us at every level, locally in your village, in your town. At the international level, you can join. There are mailing lists. There are a lot of resources available and people you can connect to, and that's important too. Let's see a few use cases to practice our sense of ethics and see what we could have done better or what we could do better right now. Of course, AI is one of these topics. It's highly impactful, it's already deployed everywhere. We use AI from interviewees screening to insurance to policing. So it already has a huge impact. It can be used for the better or for the worst. And well, the thing is, we worked on that. We now have, that's a very powerful solution to many problems we could not solve before, so that's great. Except that we didn't have the time to actually think about the consequences and so on. And we know there are a few ethical issues with AI that we have still not solved as of today. So of course there is the bias thing. The AI algorithms tend to reproduce what we think, but faster, so that's great. Except that nobody said that we should exactly mimic the human mind, because sometimes it gives things we don't want. And AI does that very well, faster than us, very well. Another thing is the explainability. So you have an AI process that says that this person is not entitled to some help, or sometimes you have to make difficult decision based on some AI process, and you just cannot explain why you come up with this decision. And from the democratic point of view, it's absolutely problematic. Another issue we have with AI is the control. We don't want to relinquish control to the robots or to the machines, probably. One good example is the killer robots thing. So killer robots are robots that can kill, okay? But they can also decide if they kill. So they see someone, they decide that this person is a bad guy, and they pull the trigger. They decide to end his life now. And well, we probably have to think about that. If you think that in the future it's already deployed everywhere, in every continent, there are killer robots that can decide if they want to kill or not, if they will kill or not. And the last point, and it's not a good point, is that we cannot expect the regulations to help here. I was in an online discussion a couple of months ago, and so it was about with lawmakers and AI researchers. So the lawmakers would explain us what they want to do to regulate the field and so on. So that was nice. And one of the AI researchers asked, so when will you come up with these laws? And the lawmakers said, in 2 years. What? 2 years? That's useless. We don't even know where we will be in 2 years. Another point with the regulations is that they depend on the country you're in. So if you have a lab and you want to do nasty things, you just have to change the country. So then the regulations change. There are countries where you can do almost whatever you want. So we should not expect the regulations to help us with ethics. Definitely not. Of course, there are all these society things about tools that we produced, that people produced, and that were put to a bad use. Things like mass surveillance programs and tools, the unethical marketing practices and social media things, or things like addictive design that was made on purpose to have people stick to their computer the whole day. Targeting kids, knowingly manipulating people. So we generally think it's okay because it's marketing and there are schools for that and so on. Well, maybe we should think again about that, given the consequences it can have. Another issue, of course, is the corporate or state ownership of personal data. And what we can do with this, especially with the new AI algorithms, we can do things that we could never have done before. Well, practically, we don't do the best things with that, usually. The good news is that there are whistleblowers. So when people see things that are not right or that are hidden and they don't want to play along that game, they come out with some confidential data and so on. And these people, more than any other people in the world in the last 50 years, contributed to the fight against corruption. I mean, whistleblowers have done more against corruption than anything else or anyone else. It requires big dose of courage. Usually they're in trouble after that. They tend to be more protected nowadays. There are laws to protect them. Honestly, it's not easy, but they did the right thing, and we really need to thank them for that. One obvious case, and we are software practitioners, so one obvious case is the way we produce software. Of course, there is a licensing thing. If you choose the right license, then people can use it, even if they have no money, and so on. So that's great. That's open source. We can adopt a code of conduct and/or ethics, and we enforce it, of course. It's just not displaying it somewhere. We set up a transparent and fair governance model, so people, when people come to our project, they don't see a black box where they don't understand the decisions and so on. So we define the governance model and we display it. And also another point is about the consumption. So when we build a tool, a system or whatsoever, we can pay attention to optimizing the resources, counting the CPU cycles, memory, disk, stopping servers when we don't use them, reusing old hardware. You probably don't need a brand new server for testing or whatsoever. So we can have an impact on that when we produce software quite easily. Now let's talk about ethics and us. What can we do? The first thing is be prepared. So because we have these things that we know we will never do. We have the things that we know we're okay with, and in between there is this gray zone. And most of the time the devil lies in this gray zone. So if there are the things you're okay with, these things you're not okay with, and your manager or someone comes and asks you to do something in this gray zone. Usually you have some heavy time constraints, there is a lot of pressure, so you make a decision that you might regret 1 year later, and there is nothing worse than realizing that this was your worst mistake in your life, because that things can go really fast with software and the tools that we produce. So we really need to think about it and to reduce that gray zone and be prepared for the kind of questions that people may ask us, so we don't get in trouble and we don't have regrets about this. Next step, once we have defined what we think is okay or not okay, we have to stand for our values. So that doesn't mean that we need to snag friends around and so on if they don't do something as we would do it. But when we see something that is not right, like abusive behavior or your manager asking your team or yourself to do something that you're not sure about, you can and you should stand for your values. That requires a lot of courage, but you have to be proud, and you will be proud of yourself 1 year later if you make the right decision at that time. And we might feel at that very moment that we are alone and that it's hard and so on. So the good news is you are not alone at that time. You can discuss and so on. And afterwards, it's highly rewarding to think that you have made the good decision. Another thing we can do as we build software and systems, we can protect our users by not collecting more than the absolutely required strict minimum of data, of privileges, and so on. We can also work on the resources that we need and that we consume. So that is something that we can easily do at our level, and when it scales up, it has a huge impact. Last step, we need to connect and discuss. Because one thing, so if I start to think about ethics and I'm all by myself, there is this feedback loop that might bring me to some extremism. So we need to share our thoughts, we need to discuss our issues with ethics and what we want to do with that and so on, because others might have different perspectives, they might have answers to questions we have, and the opposite way as well. You can nourish people, we all need to be nourished. So that's really important. We need to engage with the communities, so you choose your community, one that matters to you, and engage with them, because not only we are better, with a more open mind and so on when we work together, but we are also stronger. It becomes the new normal, and that's what we want. So that's it, a conclusion, a few takeaways. We really need to discuss, know what we think is okay or not in our community as individuals and at the community level. We really need to build this common understanding of ethics. We have knowledge, we have power, and we are responsible for our words and actions. We need to think about the consequences, the impact it has, and so on. With great power comes great responsibilities. You have the power to make a change, especially as you work in the software field. And the good news is that you are not alone. Whatever you think, if at some point you think you're a bit alone in that, you are not. There are people willing to discuss that. They can bring in their support and their thoughts and answers and so on. And the good news is that when you care about the world cares about you. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes for a few questions. Boo?
Thank you. I just was thinking about when you put some rules or codified stuff into a community, right? And you say, then you're kind of saying these, because ethics, no two philosophers agree on what the right thing to do is. There are many different schools, but if you put something in the document, you're actually saying this one is the ethics we want. Shouldn't we rather strive for a minimum rules for interaction that don't really say what the right or the wrong thing is, but in which way we should interact, right? Because otherwise you're actually excluding the people who don't agree with what's in the document if it's an ethical document. What I'm saying, it's more a procedural document than an ethical document, some codes of conduct, etc.
I would agree. That's a difficult thing to do, actually, and we probably need a minimum set of rules to have everybody like feel their part of the thing too, and so they abide by this. So we should probably not be too procedural and just state the principles. I think that's kind of what we do with things like Code of Ethics. I think it's a good start, and the good thing with it, so you cannot force people into doing that, of course, but if you start the discussion and if people feel they're part of the discussion, they will tend to then abide by this code. So I tend to agree with that, yes. Please.
Hello, I'm Matteo from Kinetics. Thank you for your presentation. I think that is now great that we are talking about how to put more ethics into software development, but how possible do you see the transition of the current amount of code that we have, which is massive, for example, of open source code, towards a more ethical use? Because as you said, ethical licenses are kind of in contrast with open source licenses. So how can we move what we already have toward a more ethical world?
Maybe we can go step by step, and starting maybe from now, what we will do from now, we will do it right, and so on. So then taking up the legacy code and so on, I'm not sure we can. Maybe we can sometimes and do a bit of change each and every time, but let's start with what we do now and what we do in the future, because in 10 years what will count is not the code that was written 10 years ago, it's the code that we write now. So it's probably incremental change that we need to do, and yeah, no, we won't be able to change the legacy, not yet, not now, not as a whole. We need to do that incrementally, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you then. No, another question, please.
Yeah, it's more of a remark. I mean, it's nice if we all act ethically, but if you look at it, there's a clear power structure in the industry, and many other, like Elon Musk or Thiel. Thiel is like a super problematic person, right? In that they're philosophically and ethically naive. they're not, and I'm not saying that, but philosophers say that these people actually have something that philosophers think is not proper philosophy, not properly thought through, right? And these people are calling the shots, and the problem is that these people have so much power, right? So you can either go work for Google or you cannot work for Google, but there's sometimes very little you can do in between. Google just being an example.
So that's not a question, that's a remark, but I'd like to say something. They are powerful, but we are the crowd. We are more powerful. We are the water. I mean, nothing can stop us. We will win.
Hasta la victoria siempre.
Thank you.